Thank you for watching Amir Shakil 5858. I am Amir Budnam. I am thankful to all news resources. Following news have been reported by American, Canadian, and European channels, Asian and African channels, and news agencies, AFP, AP, writers have also reported the same news. Now the headlines. Easter Sunday, Pope appeared. People are satisfied. Georgia new rules for Medicaid in America. Turkey local bodies elections have been won by opposition, especially in Istanbul and Ankara. Israel bombed central Gaza, a hospital, killing 3 people. Biggest protest in Jerusalem against Mr. Netanyahu. And Mr. Netanyahu have been operated for hernia. Remembering Kyiv, Ukraine, which was left by Russia 2 years ago. King Charles of Britain appeared in public yesterday. Massachusetts congressman died. Mass shooting in Indianapolis, 7 victims. Dallas Police Department is looking for a member of Super Bowl champion team. Plane crash in States. Bridge repairing is carrying on in Baltimore. Immigration deadline is near in Canada. AT&T of America's data has been leaked. 73 million customers are at risk. Sun eclipse after 8 days. Now the news in detail.
Tonight on PBS News Weekend, on this Easter Sunday, why more Americans are saying religion is losing influence in public life. Then Georgia's unique and controversial program to expand Medicaid coverage, but only for those who meet a work requirement.
You know, I have patients that I have to put A on the pill bottles if they take them in the morning, and P on the pill bottles if they take them at night. And you expect these people to be able to upload documents and renew their health insurance monthly?
And a brief but spectacular look at vanishing structures throughout rural America.
Major funding for PBS News Weekend has been provided by
Consumer Cellular. This is Sam. How may I help you? This is a pocket dial. Well, somebody's pocket.
Thought I'd let you know that with Consumer Cellular,
You get nationwide coverage with no contract. That's kind of our thing.
have a nice day.
Certified financial planner professionals are proud to support PBS News Weekend. CFP professionals are committed to acting in their clients' best interest. More information at letsmakeaplan.org.
and with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. And friends of the News Hour. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Good evening, I'm John Yang. Chaos in central Gaza today after an Israeli airstrike hit a tent encampment in the courtyard of Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital in Deir al-Balah. 2 Palestinians were reported killed and 15 others wounded. The Israeli military said it was targeting an Islamic Jihad command center and that the hospital was not affected. Among the injured were journalists who had been working nearby.
They hit the tent without any warning. We were staying in the tent as a group of journalists, peacefully, with no terrorists among us. We were preparing our cameras, and all of a sudden, the tent was hit. Everything went dark, with debris and rocks flying above our heads, and there were flames.
In Jerusalem, the biggest anti-government demonstration since the war began. Tens of thousands of people rallied outside the Parliament building, demanding that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu get a deal to free the hostages held in Gaza and hold early elections. In Ukraine, today marked the 2nd anniversary of Russian forces leaving the Kyiv region. President Volodymyr Zelensky visited a memorial site in Bucha, where Ukrainian officials say 2 years ago troops found mass graves and the bodies of men, women, and children littering the streets. The civilian death toll there passed 1,000. Appeals for peace in both the Middle East and Ukraine were part of Pope Francis's Easter message today. In St. Peter's Square in Vatican City, the Pope renewed calls for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, the release of all Israeli hostages, and a prisoner exchange between Russia and Ukraine. He told worshippers, peace is never made with weapons. The Pope made several loops of the square in his Pope-mobile to greet the tens of thousands who had gathered for the culmination of Christians' Holy Week. King Charles attended an Easter service at Windsor Castle today, his most significant public appearance since his cancer diagnosis in February. Outside St. George's Chapel, the king shook hands and chatted with well-wishers. The 75-year-old monarch is being treated for an unspecified type of cancer. And former 7-term Democratic Congressman William Delahunt of Massachusetts has died after a long illness. As a Boston area prosecutor in the late 1970s, he created what's considered to be the first domestic violence unit. Delahunt postponed his retirement from the House until 2011 to help pass former President Obama's legislative agenda. Delahunt was 82 years old. Still to come on PBS News Weekend, how the state of Georgia is trying to expand Medicaid coverage, but with a unique controversial program. And a photographer captures the stories behind the vanishing structures of rural America.
This is PBS News Weekend from WETA Studios in Washington, home of the PBS News Hour, weeknights on PBS.
Today, Christians across America celebrate Easter. Muslims are in the midst of Ramadan, and Jews, who recently marked Purim, are preparing for Passover in just a matter of weeks. So it's very timely for the Pew Research Center to be out with the results of a survey looking at Americans' attitudes about the role of religion in public life. 80% of the more than 12,000 respondents said religion's role is shrinking. That's the highest proportion in 2 decades of asking the question. Gregory Smith is Pew's Associate Director of Research. He helps coordinate the domestic polling on religion. So a big proportion of Americans saying that religion is losing influence. Do they say that's a good thing or a bad thing?
Most people who think that religion's influence is shrinking in American life think that's a bad thing. They're disappointed to see it. In fact, the survey shows very clearly that most Americans have a positive view of religion. Most people who think religion's influence is declining say that's a bad thing. The smaller number of people who think religion's influence is growing think that's a good thing. And if you put those things together, we see very clearly that most people in the United States have a positive view of religion's role in society.
I was also struck by the responses to the question of whether respondents felt that there was a conflict between their personal religion and mainstream American culture, and whether they felt their religion made them part of a minority group. What did you find there?
So the share of Americans who say they think there's at least some conflict between their own religious beliefs and mainstream American culture is up 6 points to 48% since we last asked these questions. Similarly, the share of Americans who say they think of themselves as a minority because of their religious beliefs is up 5 points since we last asked these questions. Now, most people don't say they think of themselves as a minority because of their religion. Only 29% of Americans say that. Still, the trend is in an upward direction.
What do you think that tells you? Does it say something about religious beliefs, or does it say something about people's connection with mainstream American culture?
It says a little bit about people's religious backgrounds. We know, for example, that Jewish Americans and Muslim Americans, groups that make up small shares of the population, they are among the most likely to say they think of themselves as minorities because of their religious beliefs. But there's also an element of this that is about how people perceive things to be going in society. You know, we've done other polling where we ask people whether they think their side is winning or losing on the political issues that matter to them. And big numbers of Americans, including majorities of both parties, say they think their side has been losing more than winning recently. So some of this is just a dissatisfaction, tension with broader society.
Well, precisely on that point, you also asked whether people felt that either secular liberals or conservative Christians were going too far in trying to control government and public schools in terms of religion. What did you find there?
What we see is that most Democrats and most people who aren't particularly religious themselves, they think conservative Christians are going too far trying to impose their religion in public life. The flip side of that is also true. Most Republicans and most Christians, including a huge majority of evangelical Protestants, say they think secular liberals are going too far in trying to keep religion out of the government and public schools. So it's sort of people on both sides think that the other side is going to extremes.
Of course, this is a presidential election year. What did you find about people's attitudes toward, or their feelings toward, whether a president has strong religious feelings or not?
The survey is really interesting. It finds that a huge majority of the public, including people across every religious group we're able to analyze and people in both parties, say they want a president who personally lives a morally upstanding life. So that's something Americans can agree on. Fewer people say they want a president who is personally religious or who shares their own religious beliefs. But many people, most Americans, about 2/3, say they do want a president that they can count on to stand up for people with religious beliefs like their own.
So it's not necessarily that they agree with the religious beliefs or have the same religious beliefs. They just want the president to be standing up for them.
That's exactly right. It's way more important for people to have a president who stands up for them than it is to have a president who shares their religious beliefs. And we can see, for example, that many of the people who have favorable opinions of Joe Biden and Donald Trump don't necessarily think that those two are very religious themselves. But the people who have favorable views of each candidate do think that their preferred candidate stands up for people with their religious beliefs.
You also asked a question about a topic that's been a hot topic recently, Christian nationalism, the ideology that the United States should be a Christian nation. What did you find there?
Yeah, the survey finds that a lot of Americans say they want the Bible to have some influence on U.S. laws and policies, but only 28% of Americans say that if the Bible and the will of the people are in conflict, we should rely more on the Bible than the will of the people in terms of making laws.
When you take all this together and put it together, what does it tell you about the state of Americans when they look at religion and how their views are changing?
I'd say there's two main things that jump out to me. One is that we know that religion, the place of religion in American life is changing. The United States has grown gradually less religious in recent decades, and we see that in the growing share of Americans who tell us they think religion is losing influence in American life. The other thing that jumps out at me in this survey is that Americans are divided on these topics, as they are on so many other things. People on both sides of the political and religious spectrum think that those on the other side are going to extremes, trying to see their preferred policies and approach to life enacted in laws and in the public schools.
Very interesting look. Gregory Smith from the Pew Research Center. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Since Medicaid was created nearly 60 years ago, it's been expanded many times, and it's now the government's biggest public health insurance program. Tonight, I'll look at the efforts to expand it even further with a visit to the only state with a work requirement for Medicaid. It's part of our ongoing series, America's Safety Net.
What?
For Shannon Allison, taking her emotional support dog, Wolf, for a walk in her Atlanta neighborhood can feel like an ordeal.
You waiting patient for Mama?
The 48-year-old has limited mobility because of hip dysplasia and degenerative disc disease.
Come.
Her biggest health challenge came in 2018 when she was diagnosed with breast cancer. She didn't have health insurance at the time, but the diagnosis qualified her for Medicaid's Women's Health Program for breast and cervical cancer.
As an adult, never having private insurance, I mean, it was a miracle. It was like, wow, finally, somebody can see about this symptom and somebody can treat that, and I can, and maybe I can get back to work.
The coverage also paid for a hip replacement in 2020 and for medication to treat a heart condition and bipolar disorder. So now your cancer's in remission?
Yes, thank God.
Well, thank God the cancer's in remission, but
yes.
What does that mean for your Medicaid?
Well, it means since I'm no longer seeing an oncologist that it's been 5 years, and if you're not continuing to see an oncologist, you're not qualified for women's health Medicaid anymore.
The only other time Allison had health insurance was when her pregnancies qualified her for Medicaid. Physical limitations have kept her from holding a job since 2012, and before that she'd never had one that gave her coverage. And despite having no income, she does not qualify for Georgia's traditional Medicaid program, which requires a participant to not only have a low income, but also be pregnant, have a child, or have a disability.
See here, it's got where I was approved for
Right.
the termination, and then denial for the regular Medicaid.
No eligible people in your household. Not having Medicaid, how did that make you feel?
Well, I'm scared, really. I need a continuation of care for my hip, and psych meds, for instance, a lot of things. It's just like I fall in a gap. I don't know, it's scary.
Georgia is one of 10 states that has not used the Affordable Care Act to expand Medicaid to cover all adults earning less than 138% of the federal poverty line, or about $20,800 a year for an individual. Under the act, the federal government pays a generous subsidy for the additional cost.
There's been a lot of momentum in our surrounding neighbor states, and I think that legislators are seeing how it is a good deal for Georgia.
Leah Chan is Director of Health Justice at Georgia Budget and Policy Institute, a nonpartisan research group and a proponent of full Medicaid expansion. She says it would benefit the estimated 400,000 uninsured Georgians in what's called the coverage gap, earning too little to qualify for federal subsidies in the ACA insurance marketplace, but not qualifying for Medicaid in the state because they're adults without a qualifying disability.
This is just an economic imperative. We can no longer ignore the financial benefits that we would get from closing the coverage gap. And I think we can no longer ignore the mounting pressure that many communities are feeling as hospitals close and as more people fall into the coverage gap.
Since 2013, 12 hospitals across Georgia have shut their doors, including Atlanta Medical Center here in the heart of the city, which closed in 2022. One reason for the financial squeeze? Unreimbursed care for people with low incomes and no insurance. Earlier this year, Georgia lawmakers signaled a willingness to consider Medicaid expansion. But in February, legislative leaders said the issue needed more study. Instead, Georgia has a new program called Pathways to Coverage.
Georgia Pathways provides a hand up and a way for our citizens to thrive.
Pathways provides Medicaid to adults who earn less than 100% of the federal poverty line, or about $15,000 a year for an individual, and spend at least 80 hours a month either working, going to school, participating in job training, or doing volunteer service. Georgia's the only state with a Medicaid work requirement currently in place. State officials estimated that 50,000 people would enroll in Pathways in its first 2 years, but since it launched last July, only about 3,500 have signed up. Georgia's Department of Community Health, which administers Pathways, declined an interview request, but in a statement said the program puts Georgia at the forefront of innovation in healthcare and serves as a new way to increase access to affordable healthcare coverage.
I would hope that the critics, those who are calling for full Medicaid expansion, would actually choose to embrace this program and help raise awareness because it does provide a pathway to healthcare coverage for the recipients.
Chris Denson is the Director of Policy and Research at the Georgia Public Policy Foundation, a conservative free market think tank. The fact that you're asking people in order to get the coverage, you have to put in something. Do you think that's an important factor?
We believe it's an important factor because these are able-bodied working-age individuals. And so in order to not only receive the program, we think it's important for them to have some skin in the game. This is also a pathway to receiving private insurance. And we want more patients on more private health insurance plans where it's easier to see a physician because the physician or the hospital is paid more for seeing those patients.
Nationwide, about 30% of physicians don't accept new Medicaid patients. In Georgia, according to one survey, it's 40%. But Leah Chan says research on Medicaid, including from states that use the ACA to expand, shows that those on the program have better health outcomes. What's more, she says, Georgia taxpayers pay more for each Pathways participant than they would under full Medicaid expansion because the federal subsidy is smaller. You say that Pathways isn't as good as Medicaid expansion, but is it better than nothing?
So we have the opportunity before us to bring billions of dollars to our state, create tens of thousands of new jobs, shore up the financial stability of our rural hospitals, and get access to healthcare for hundreds of thousands of Georgians. And instead, we have chosen this other path that is more expensive and covers fewer people.
In addition, Chan says the existing Pathways program has a big barrier. Every month, participants must submit documentation to certify that they're meeting the requirements. That's impossible for people like Donald Crawford in rural Toccoa, Georgia, northeast of Atlanta near the South Carolina border. Uninsured, he relies on the free Open Arms Clinic for all his healthcare needs, including prescriptions.
I got high blood pressure, diabetes, breathing problems.
Crawford hasn't had full-time employment since the thread mill where he worked shut down nearly a decade ago. Now he does odd jobs, just a couple of hours a month. The 58-year-old says even if he had the hours to qualify for Pathways, there's no way he could do the reporting.
But this phone right here, I'm out of low school. I had to flip phone. My daughter got this phone right here. Been working with me and everything. You know, all this technology. I ain't no way. Yeah, I ain't no way.
Clinic Executive Director Sherry Beavers is one of only 2 paid employees. Everyone else, including the doctors, are volunteers.
You know that little room in your doctor's office that they take you to, and they give you a little sample? This is our sample room.
Beavers says that in the absence of full Medicaid expansion, clinics like hers fill a vital need for low-income adults in Georgia, helping them manage chronic conditions like diabetes.
That's over $1 million worth of insulin right there. The difference between life and death for a person with diabetes.
Pathways is aimed at some of the people who use the Open Arms Clinic, but Beavers says not a single one of the clinic's patients has enrolled in the program.
The qualifications are just too steep. You know, I have patients that I have to put A on the pill bottles if they take them in the morning, and P on the pill bottles if they take them at night. And you expect these people to be able to upload documents and renew their health insurance monthly? It's not going to work.
For Shannon Allison in Atlanta, the documentation isn't the problem. The problem, she says, is actually doing the required activities.
If I could do a part-time job, I would do it for money,
Right.
or Medicaid, either one.
Right.
I'd love to have, I'd take the Medicaid over the money. But the point is, I can't do it.
Recently, she was turned down for Social Security disability benefits, but a recent mammogram spotted something that requires additional testing. It could be another serious health challenge, but ironically, it could also give her coverage again, qualifying her for Women's Health Medicaid. How does this make you feel about this whole system?
Well, I feel cheated. It's almost like, in a way, I feel discriminated against. I'm just confused as to why Georgia did this and some places didn't. It's almost making me want to move, because I need the care that badly.
For more than 2 decades, Vermont-based photographer Jim Westphalen has documented old farmhouses, barns, churches, and homes that have fallen into disrepair. He calls it Finding Beauty in Decay. He's collected his works in a book and a film, both called Vanish, Disappearing Icons of a Rural America. Tonight, Westphalen shares his brief but spectacular take on the vanishing structures of rural America.
Just like taking a portrait of a person, when I'm looking right at the face of the building, I feel like it's looking back at me, and I can really look into the soul of the building, looking through the windows or looking into a front door. That's what I'm looking for to kind of evoke that emotion. So this structure I happened upon a couple of years back down a lonely little dirt road in Vermont here. These vines that are on the outside of the building, they're actually growing from inside, so it looks like the building is weeping. In 1996, we moved to Vermont. As a photographer, it was just heaven. I'd be out roaming the countryside with my camera, and I realized that a lot of the structures that I was passing, they were starting to decay, fall into disrepair. And as a visual artist, I was drawn to what that meant visually, the rusted patina of a roof, or old barn sides, or faded clapboard on the old farmhouses. And I spent every free moment out there photographing these old structures. And without knowing it, I was building this body of work. So I loosely started this project about 20 years ago, and it was without intention then. I would just travel the countryside photographing these beautiful old buildings because I was really attracted to them. And as the body of work grew, I realized there really was this tangible message here. These structures are so fleeting, and we're in this period of history where we're experiencing this profound loss. It's more than just documenting it. It really is depicting and capturing the soul of the structure in a way that really honors what it once was, and also honors the people who spent their lives there. Of course, I would stop and ask permission to be on somebody's property before I went and photographed it. Once I told them a little about what I'm doing, they just love to share their stories. They tell me how, they're 6th generation farming on this land, struggling to keep it going now. There was this rich history to be told behind the visual beauty of the structures, as they sit today. And if I can just ignite a little bit of a spark in people, and maybe ignite a spark in those who can tangibly do something about the loss that we're experiencing, to maybe restore, and if not restore, at least maintain these old structures, then I've done my job. Because once the structures are gone, and that generation who are connected to those structures are gone, the stories go with it, as if they were never there. I'm Jim Westphalen, and this is my brief but spectacular take on the vanishing structures of rural America.
And that is PBS News Weekend for this Sunday. I'm John Yang. For all of my colleagues, thanks for joining us. Have a good week.
Major funding for PBS News Weekend has been provided by
Certified Financial Planner professionals are proud to support PBS News Weekend. CFP professionals are committed to acting in their clients' best interest. More information at letsmakeaplan.org.
and with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions.
Turkey sends a message to President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, with the main opposition making huge gains during local elections. Its leader saying the voters have decided to establish a new political order. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu undergoes surgery on Sunday after a national address in which he vows to keep up the fight against Hamas, the group refusing to join the table of peace talks in Cairo as lives continue to be lost in Gaza. Remembering the Butcher massacre, the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky leads commemorations in the town 2 years after it was liberated from Russian forces. Those of you just joining us, welcome to the France 24 newsroom in Paris. I'm Alexander Orkot. Now, it's a major blow to the Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan during local elections that some billed as a referendum on his leadership. The main opposition Republican People's Party retained its control over key cities, including the capital Ankara and the commercial hub Istanbul, along with many gains made elsewhere. Siobhan Silk has the story.
Adana, Ankara, Antalya, Aydın, Eskişehir, Mersin, Muğla, Tekirdağ, İzmir ve İstanbul'u yeniden kazandık.
City after city, as the results came in, it became clear it would be a night of celebration for Turkey's opposition. The main opposition party, the CHP, held onto the mayor's offices in the capital Ankara and the largest city, Istanbul, and made huge gains elsewhere, including in cities traditionally held by the AK party of President Recep Tayyip Erdogan.
Today, the voters made a very important decision. The election results show that today the voters decided to establish a new politics in Turkey. Today, the voters decided to change the 22-year-old picture of Turkey and open the door to a new political climate in our country.
These municipal elections are widely seen as a referendum on the leadership of the conservative Erdogan more than 2 decades into his rule, a decade as prime minister and a decade as president. He was re-elected just last year, but confidence in the government has been waning as Turkey struggles with rampant inflation and a cost of living crisis. At his party headquarters, Erdogan told a subdued crowd that the election wasn't an end, but a turning point.
We will open-heartedly analyze the results within our party and make our self-criticism boldly. However, we will not disrespect our nation's decision in any way. We will avoid being stubborn, acting against the national will, and questioning the judgment of our nation.
The opposition was demoralised after losing last year's presidential vote and making a disappointing showing in parliamentary elections. These municipal results bring them a renewed hope that they can change Turkey's political landscape after a generation under Erdogan.
Next, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has vowed to keep up military pressure on Hamas during a televised address, at which time he announced he was undergoing surgery for a hernia on Sunday night. That operation now reported to have been successful. Netanyahu also said his side had shown flexibility during peace talks, while Hamas has refused to show up in Cairo. Fighting rages on. The IDF said a senior Islamic Jihad militant was killed in a strike on a command centre that was at the Al-Aqsa hospital, they said, and a ground offensive on the southern city of Rafah is still being planned.
Despite resounding calls from the international community that a ground operation in Rafah would be catastrophic, a defiant Benjamin Netanyahu is pushing on.
We will go into Rafah and will eliminate Hamas battalions there, for one simple reason. There's no victory without the operation in Rafah, and there's no victory without the elimination of Hamas there.
On Sunday, ahead of an unexpected hernia surgery, the Israeli Prime Minister said that his defence force is prepared for the evacuation of civilians and the provision of humanitarian aid, but gave no details of how it would unfold or what it would mean for the 1.4 million Palestinians currently living in the southern city, most already displaced from their homes and facing imminent famine. His statement comes as truce talks were set to resume with mediators in Cairo on Sunday, 2 days after Netanyahu gave the green light for them to continue. However, Hamas was yet to send a delegation, with their officials saying that they believe Netanyahu is not serious about negotiating and that the gap between the two positions was too wide. Meanwhile, Israeli forces continued their operations in the enclave with a focus on its hospitals, such as here at Al-Shifa, where Netanyahu claimed Israeli forces have killed more than 200 Hamas gunmen. At Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital in central Gaza, people scrambled for safety after an Israeli airstrike hit a tent camp inside the hospital compound, injuring multiple people. They make up some of the tens of thousands who have sought refuge in Gaza's hospitals since the start of the war, nearly 6 months ago.
Meanwhile, tens of thousands of Israelis demonstrated in the central Jerusalem earlier in the largest protests against Netanyahu's government since the war began almost 6 months ago. Though the country remains largely in favour of the war, they're pressuring the authorities to reach a ceasefire agreement to secure the release of the remaining Israeli hostages.
The simmering anger finally boils over. Every week for months, Israelis have been gathering to demand the release of the hostages still held in Gaza. Outside the Knesset on Sunday, their protests escalated. During the biggest march yet, they blocked the road and lit fires to show their fury at the government as the war in Gaza approaches the 6-month mark. As well as the release of the hostages, they have a second demand. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu must go.
This is my country. I was born here, and it's being destroyed by our prime minister. People are being killed in Gaza. Palestinians are being killed. I'm against this war. I'm against this death from every side.
When Netanyahu wants something, he knows how to get it. The fact that there is no hostage deal still means that he doesn't want it yet. It's because he knows that once the war is over and the hostages are back, all the people here and many, many, many more will go after his head and demand that he and his bad government will resign.
In a video address on Sunday, Netanyahu told Israelis he understood the pain of the hostages' families, but amid the demands for a ceasefire, he doubled down on his determination to press on with the war in Gaza and stay in office.
Calls for immediate elections in the midst of war just before victory would paralyse Israel for at least 6 months, if not 8. It would paralyse negotiations for the release of our hostages. It would bring an end to the war before we have achieved our objectives, and the first to benefit would be Hamas.
The families of the hostages aren't buying it. They're promising to turn their until now weekly protests into daily ones, repeating the same demands until they're heard.
Moving on now to Ukraine, and President Volodymyr Zelensky has been in the town of Bucha in the Kiev region to commemorate the second anniversary of the area's liberation from Russian forces. In a ceremony attended by his Prime Minister, several ambassadors and the families of the dead, he held a minute of silence and paid tribute to the victims who were killed in what's today become known as the Bucha massacre.
2 years on after the massacre that shocked Ukraine and the world, families honour the memory of hundreds killed in the town of Bucha. This woman's son Dennis was among those murdered by Moscow's troops.
When I saw the photos of the murdered boys, I couldn't believe that my son was among them. I didn't want to believe it, but it was indeed true. He was captured by Russian soldiers and tortured. His teeth were knocked out. He took a bullet in the thigh, the second in the stomach, and the third in the eye.
Bucha has become a symbol of the savagery committed by Moscow's forces since its invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. Kiev's troops retook the town on the 31st of March to find hundreds of bodies of men, women and children scattered along the streets, homes and in mass graves, many showing signs of torture. President Volodymyr Zelensky says the world must never forget the human cost of Russia's war.
When our soldiers expelled Russia from Bucha, from Irpin, from Borodyanka, from the entire Kiev region, from Sumy region, and from Chernihiv region, everyone could see that these were victories not only of Ukrainian courage and weapons, but also of human morality.
Residents of Bucha are still working to identify the remaining victims and pushing for the atrocities committed in their town to be acknowledged internationally as war crimes.
Now here in France, the nation has been gripped by the story of Émile Soleil, a toddler who disappeared last year while staying with his grandparents in the Alps. Well, a massive search was mounted, involving police, soldiers, sniffer dogs, helicopters and drones, but there was no sign of him until this weekend, when the mystery was solved in tragic fashion, as the remains of the 2-year-old were discovered by a walker.
In this dense forest, amid mountains, rivers and hills, investigators are at work. They are combing an area where bones belonging to Emile Soleil were found on Saturday, near where he was last seen by neighbours walking alone in July last year. He was just 2.5 years old. A woman found a skull while hiking and notified police. It was then flown by helicopter to a scientific lab and confirmed through genetic testing. The DNA belonged to Emile, who disappeared 9 months ago in the hamlet of Le Vernet in southeast France. For the moment, the cause of death is undetermined, but the shock of the discovery has reverberated throughout the local community.
His disappearance has rocked the community. We are very sad. We've been following the investigation. It's a very particular time acknowledging this loss. It's very hard.
We want to know what happened. My heart goes out to the family. I think of them first. It's terrible. A little child of 2.5 years.
The boy's parents were notified and they released a statement through their lawyer.
If this heartbreaking news was feared, the time has come for mourning, contemplation and prayer.
The two were absent the day Emile went missing. What followed was a 4-day search of the area and investigations that ultimately reached no conclusion. Now, a forensic analysis will continue to try to determine exactly what caused Emile's death.
Now, over 18s can smoke cannabis legally in Germany from today, as drug laws have been relaxed there to be some of the most liberal in Europe. It also means that up to 3 marijuana plants can be cultivated at home and 25 grams of dry cannabis carried by any individual. The government argues that decriminalisation will be hitting the black market, but addiction experts warn more has to be done to prevent young people from being exposed to the drug, which can be dangerous, particularly for those under 25 whose brains are still developing. Finally, Bulgaria and Romania have experienced their first full day as new members of Europe's vast Schengen area of free movement, allowing travel by sea and air to the rest of the zone without document checks. Land routes remain closed due to a veto by Austria, which expressed concern that it would lead to a flood of illegal immigration. This may change, however, by the end of this year. Let's take a listen now, though, for some of the travellers on the first day.
It's a historic moment. It's history in the making, something that should have been done many years ago. But now something unjust for Romania has been fixed.
I travel often and I find this partial Schengen accession an immense pleasure as it makes things easier for all of us. We enter the terminal in less than 3 minutes, baggage checks included, so everything is just great.
The first flight operated without any border controls coming from the Schengen space was, slightly ironically, an Austrian Airlines flight from Vienna.
That's where we end this edition. Stay tuned for more world news on France 24.
Hello and welcome to Tete a Tete, France 24's flagship interview show. Our guest today is Boston.
Tonight, several developing stories as we come on the air. Flood watches and winter weather alerts in the west. Multiple states from the south to the mid-Atlantic now bracing for severe storms, possibly tornadoes. A mass shooting in Indiana, 7 victims, the youngest just 12 years old. And what do you need to know about the serious AT&T data breach? But first, the storm in the west, more than 20 million under flood watches. Cars spinning out. Part of the major coastal highway washed away. More than a foot of snow falling in the mountains. And the nation's heartland now faces a severe weather threat to start the week. Our weather team times it all out. Also tonight, 7 children shot outside a mall in Indianapolis. The victims ranging in age from 12 to 17.
I need 4 medics right now.
Police plead with parents to keep their kids out of trouble as they search for a suspect. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu undergoes surgery at a critical moment. His government facing mounting protests with more than 100 Israeli hostages still held in Gaza. A key member of the Super Bowl champions wanted by police. His possible connection to this serious chain reaction crash. A deadly plane crash in Northern California, the plane going down while attempting to land. What we're learning about the victims, 2 successful tech entrepreneurs. Cranes and crews begin the painstaking work of removing the wreckage from the Key Bridge. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg with the timeline for reopening the Baltimore Harbor. The AT&T breach, 73 million accounts impacted, the equivalent of 1 in 5 Americans. Some account information now turning up on the dark web. The implications and why you might need to change your password now. Countdown to the eclipse, just 8 days until the once-in-a-generation phenomenon as the sun appears to vanish behind the moon. Visitors flocking to 13 states that will see a total eclipse. Hotel rooms already selling out. And Easter around the world, the faithful joining in prayer. A sunrise celebration in the nation's capital, and Pope Francis and his plea for peace at the Vatican.
From ABC News World Headquarters in New York, this is World News Tonight.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us on this Easter Sunday. We do begin tonight with a dangerous storm system on the move. More than 20 million on alert for flooding in Southern California. Heavy rain washing out this highway in Montecito, leaving a long line of stranded drivers. Rain causing spinouts and crashes on a drenched highway in the San Fernando Valley. This highway near Big Sur was forced to close after a section of it fell into the ocean. In Long Beach, the rain and gusty winds caused this tree to fall onto a house, but fortunately, the mother and son inside the home are safe tonight. This comes as millions prepare to head home after a long holiday weekend. Our weather team is tracking it all. Danny Beckstrom from our partner station, WABC in New York, leads us off.
Tonight, more than 20 million people in Southern California remain under flood watches.
We are still seeing some pretty strong cells moving through this morning.
In northern Los Angeles, heavy rain on Highway 101 causing this sedan to spin out. Moments later, a second car colliding into it. No major injuries reported.
Oh my God, this car is flooded.
In Montecito, cars flooded on this part of Highway 101 after heavy rains turned the roads into a river there. And in Long Beach, the rain and gusting winds causing this eucalyptus tree to collapse onto a house with a mother and son inside. Luckily, no one was injured. Parts of Highway 1 near Big Sur forced to close after this 10-foot section of the southbound lane collapsed into the ocean near the Rocky Creek Bridge, prompting officials to rescue stranded passengers. Southern California has been inundated with relentless rounds of rain this year. Downtown Los Angeles alone received more than a foot of rain in February, making it the wettest month the city's experienced in 26 years.
In the San Bernardino Mountains, intense snowfall and high winds bringing low visibility and treacherous driving conditions. Stranded cars and vehicles along the roads, drivers trying to dig out over a foot of snow since Friday night.
A mixed bag on this April Eve, and Danny is back with us now. Danny, this storm system is making its way across the country, now threatening the heartland. Time this all out for us.
It is. Lindsay, heavy rain, mountain snow impacting the West Coast all weekend long, and it's not over yet. Flooding concerns continue for Southern California this evening, with alerts in effect across several states, including winter weather hazards for much of the Rockies. Tomorrow, our attention turns to the middle of the country as the system slides a severe thunderstorm threat to the heartland. Cities like Dallas, Tulsa, and St. Louis on alert for a potential severe weather outbreak with damaging wind, large hail, and possible tornadoes. An enhanced risk, that's level 3 of 5, for severe storms for much of Oklahoma, Missouri, and Illinois after dark on Monday. Tuesday, the threat shifts east again, with parts of the South and Mid-Atlantic facing the potential for strong wind and large hail. The system also a big rainmaker here in the Northeast, with rounds of rain through midweek. After New York City saw the 4th wettest March in recorded history, it's going to be a rough start to the work week for so many. Lindsay?
Lots of varied concerns there weather-wise, Danny. Thank you. Now to that mass shooting in Indianapolis, at least 7 children shot near a mall. Police say all of the victims are between the ages of 12 and 17. Tonight, the urgent search for the shooter. This is just the latest outbreak of violence in that city in recent weeks. Here's ABC's Morgan Norwood with the new details coming in tonight.
Tonight, authorities in Indianapolis investigating a mass shooting outside a shopping mall that injured 7 children, the youngest just 12 years old.
I need 4 medics right now.
It is extremely concerning to us that so many of our young people have been victims of gun violence this evening.
Police say they were already on patrol Saturday night when they heard gunfire. They found a large group of kids and say 6 of them had been shot.
How did you male shot twice? Let's not relate tourniquets applied.
Officers frantically calling for medics as they started aid on their own. Police say another injured child showed up at the hospital that same night.
This was 11:30 at night, the evening right before Sunday, Easter. So if you don't know where your 12-year-old is, I think that should be a priority for you.
This shooting just the latest in Indianapolis in the past 2 weeks. Last weekend, police say they fatally shot a suspect who himself shot 5 people outside a bar. And the weekend before, police say an argument also at a bar led to a shooting that killed 1 person and injured 5 others.
Conflict should not lead to somebody pulling out a gun and trying to resolve it. The consequences are eternal.
And Lindsay, police believe this latest incident stemmed from some sort of argument. They also believe there was more than 1 gun involved. Tonight, they are combing through surveillance video to track down the suspect. Lindsay?
Certainly a top priority there, Morgan. Thank you. Overseas now to Pope Francis, overcoming concerns about his health to deliver the traditional Easter Sunday message. More than 60,000 gathering in St. Peter's Basilica Square. The 87-year-old pontiff appeared in good form after a busy Holy Week. He skipped an event on Friday to preserve his health. More now from ABC's Inez de la Quintana.
On this Easter Sunday, Pope Francis delivering a message of hope and peace before the more than 60,000 faithful who packed St. Peter's Square.
A cominciare da quelle di Israele e Palestina.
The pontiff calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, for more aid to be allowed in, and for the release of Israeli hostages held by Hamas, as well as a Russia-Ukraine prisoner swap. The Pope highlighting the plight of children in conflict zones who he said have forgotten how to smile.
La pace.
Adding, peace is never made with weapons, but with outstretched hands and open hearts. The 87-year-old who suffers from mobility and respiratory issues, mostly sitting during the service, later smiling as he shook hands with cardinals, and he appeared to be in good spirits as he waved to the crowds from his Pope-mobile. This after the Pope limited his appearance at several events leading up to Easter Sunday, raising new concerns about his health. The Vatican saying it was to preserve his health for the weekend ceremonies.
And Inez joins us now. Inez, there was another notable appearance on this Easter holiday at Windsor Castle.
That's right, Lindsay. King Charles and Queen Camilla attended services at St. George's Chapel at Windsor Castle. It was a rare public appearance for the king since his cancer diagnosis earlier this year. As expected, Prince William and Princess Kate were not in attendance, but the king seemed to be in good spirits, thanking members of the congregation and members of the public who were there. Lindsay?
Inez, thank you. Next tonight, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is undergoing surgery to treat a hernia. This is Netanyahu faces protests at home and international criticism over the war with Hamas. Ceasefire talks are set to resume this week. Let's bring in ABC's Britt Clennett, who's in Israel for us. And Britt, this is clearly a critical moment for Netanyahu.
Yeah, tonight, Lindsay, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is undergoing surgery for a hernia as anger mounts against his failure to bring home the 132 hostages still held in Gaza. Tens of thousands gathered in the largest demonstration held in Jerusalem since the war began. Hours ago, speaking ahead of the surgery, Netanyahu saying he will return to work very quickly, reiterating there is no victory without going into Rafah. It comes amid a widening rift with Biden. Netanyahu again saying pressure from the US won't stop them from destroying the Hamas battalions there. Despite that, the Biden administration greenlighting another round of weapons for Israel worth billions of dollars. Some Democrats are criticizing the decision, saying Israel has a responsibility to limit civilian casualties and allow more aid into Gaza amid a worsening humanitarian crisis. Lindsay?
Britt, thank you. Back here at home, police in Dallas are reportedly looking for NFL star Rashee Rice. Our Dallas affiliate WFAA cites sources reports the wide receiver for the Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs is being sought in connection with a major multi-vehicle accident Saturday evening. Police say a Lamborghini and Corvette were speeding when they lost control and crashed. Everyone in those 2 cars ran off. 4 people in other cars suffered minor injuries in the chain reaction crash. Next tonight, the investigation into a deadly plane crash in Northern California. 2 people died after a single-engine plane crash while trying to land at the Truckee Tahoe Airport on Saturday night. The NTSB and FAA are now on the scene. What we're learning about the victims. Here's ABC's Jacqueline Lee.
Tonight, the NTSB and FAA launching an urgent investigation into what caused a single-engine aircraft to crash into this wooded area in Northern California, killing 2.
Aircraft holding go. Pilot possibly ejected. We're trying to walk around, look for it.
Authorities say the incident took place shortly before 7 p.m. local time Saturday. The plane crashing while attempting to land at Truckee Tahoe Airport. Light snow falling in the area at the time. Crews racing to the scene. Parts of the aircraft coming down on railroad tracks near the airport.
Looks like one of these tracks is completely unusable.
Late today, Silicon Valley Fund Up West saying in a statement, their senior advisor, Laron Petrushka, and his wife, Naomi, both well-known tech entrepreneurs, lost their lives in the crash, saying, we are all heartbroken by this loss, and will forever hold Laron and Naomi in our hearts.
Lindsay, tracking data shows the plane originated from Centennial Airport in Colorado before it crashed. According to the NTSB, the couple were the only two on board. Lindsay?
Jacqueline, thank you. Now to the massive recovery efforts underway after that deadly bridge collapse in Maryland. The first of several Carnival cruise ships rerouted to Norfolk from Baltimore arrived in port today. The Coast Guard released this video of crews cutting the top portion of the bridge. Let's bring in ABC's Ike Ajachi, who's in Baltimore for us. And Ike, what have you learned about the timeline for reopening this vital port?
Well, Lindsay, Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg says the Army Corps of Engineers do not want to speculate on a timeline given the complexity of this operation. Nevertheless, crews are already removing large sections of the bridge. Earlier today, a 200-ton piece of the span was removed from a portion of the wreckage. But it's not all about just clearing the debris. Engineers are constantly checking to make sure no other portions of the bridge will shift during the ongoing removal process. Experts say pieces of metal are under a lot of compression and tension. They can behave like a spring if not expertly managed. Crews did a grounding survey, which was an effort to determine how hard the ground around the dolly is, giving insight on the best strategy for pulling pieces of metal off. Again, no word on when a bridge will be up and running. Meanwhile, the work on opening a restricted channel continues to allow smaller vessels the ability to get around the wreckage. Lindsay?
Really important lifeline there, Ike. Thank you. We now turn to the AT&T data breach that dumped millions of customers' personal information onto the dark web. Let's bring in ABC's Mary Alice Parks, who's in Washington. Mary Alice, what's the latest on that investigation?
Yeah, Lindsay, AT&T admitting that even people's social security numbers were compromised, ending up on the dark web. And just the size of this data breach was absolutely staggering. Over 70 million account holders. That's the equivalent of 1 in 5 Americans. Now, AT&T says that 90% are former accounts. The data appears to be from 2019 or earlier. AT&T says they're reaching out to those former customers, resetting the passcodes for current account holders, and working with cybersecurity experts. The company says they have not identified the source yet, and that personal call history and financial information was not included. But Lindsay, of course, in February, service was impacted for many hours for many AT&T customers after a software update went wrong. The company blamed that on a technical coding error. Lindsay?
All right, Mary Alice, our thanks to you. Next tonight, the countdown to the total solar eclipse, now just 8 days away. This rare event is expected to generate record-breaking travel and spending. Millions of Americans are hitting the roads to secure the best views, with major cities prepping for a much-needed economic boost. Here's ABC's Rena Roy.
Tonight, the countdown is on, with just 8 days until that once-in-a-generation total solar eclipse.
I don't know if there are words to describe the level of excitement I have.
From Texas to Maine, 31 million Americans across 13 states in the path of totality, where the moon will completely block the sun, creating sudden darkness for about 4 minutes and a temperature drop of roughly 10 degrees Fahrenheit. Millions of eclipse chasers expected to travel for a front row seat, the phenomenon projected as the year's largest mass travel event in the U.S. The FAA expects this to be the busiest week of spring, forecasting more than 50,000 flights on Thursday alone and warning of potential delays.
I think many communities are also going to see tourists unlike the numbers that they've ever seen before.
Towns and cities in the eclipse's path bracing for an influx of visitors.
There's approximately 10,000 rooms available. To the best of our knowledge, that most of those are sold out.
The Myers family driving 1,500 miles from Florida to Dallas, Texas.
We booked our room back in the fall, maybe October, November.
Hundreds of schools closing or dismissing early for the day. Local officials expecting heavy traffic.
These are going to be small roads that don't normally see tens of thousands of people that could potentially be seeing tens of thousands of vehicles.
And Lindsay, it's really no surprise that skywatchers are flocking from all around the country for this. Here in the lower 48 states, we won't be seeing this again for another 20 years. Lindsay?
A monumental moment, Rena. Thank you. And you can see the eclipse on Monday, April 8th, with coverage starting on GMA. You can follow it live on Eclipse Across America beginning at 2 p.m. Eastern on ABC, ABC News Live, Nat Geo, and all of Disney's family of networks and social platforms. There's so much more ahead on World News Tonight this Sunday. We're getting close to another $1 billion lottery jackpot and March Madness, 2 tickets to the Women's Final Four, and a rematch for the ages. Next tonight, the tragic death of a rising star. Chance Perdomo was killed in a motorcycle accident, according to his representatives. Perdomo's breakout role came in the Netflix series Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. He also starred in Prime Video's Gen V. Chance Perdomo was just 27 years old. To March Madness now, Purdue will join UConn and Alabama in the Final Four on the men's side. For the women, you saw it right here on ABC. South Carolina just keeps its perfect season alive after beating Oregon State 70-58 to make the Final Four. North Carolina State is also going. They upset Texas 76-66. Hoping to join them are Caitlin Clark's Iowa and Angel Reese's LSU. They'll meet tomorrow in a rematch of last year's championship game. When we come back, Beyonce proves once again why so many call her the Queen. It's in the index and a police chase, but it may not be what you expect. Body cam video from Albuquerque police shows an officer on horseback giving chase to a shoplifting suspect who was accused of stealing more than $200 worth of merchandise from Walgreens. The man yelled, "It wasn't me," as he tried to evade the officer. He gave up when 2 more officers arrived on horses. Next, the Queen is shattering records again. Beyonce's country-inspired album Cowboy Carter debuted Friday with more than 76 million streams on Spotify. It's the year's biggest one-day debut and the biggest ever by a black female artist. Her single Texas Hold'em had already been streamed more than 200 million times. And tickets sold in 4 different states came close to winning the Powerball grand prize, matching 5 numbers, but not the Powerball. That means the jackpot has now grown to a whopping $975 million for the Monday night drawing. The odds of winning are 1 in 292 million. Good luck. And when we come back, Easter celebrations the world over. Finally, the joy and promise of Easter. Throngs of Christians worldwide celebrating Easter today, the culmination of Holy Week. In Washington, D.C., parishioners from the National Community Church attended a service on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. Thousands gathered at dawn at the top of Stone Mountain in Georgia. The park there has held a sunrise service to celebrate Easter since 1944. In Baltimore, worshipers attended Easter Mass at Sacred Heart of Jesus and St. Patrick. In Philippines, a celebratory procession at dawn. The age-old practice of hunting for Easter eggs in Germany, and in Sri Lanka, women held candles as they offered prayers. At this Easter prayer event in Nepal, participants adorned bright and bold attire, commemorating the occasion with dance. Ceremonies both solemn and celebratory around the globe, marking the most important festival in the Christian calendar with processions, prayers, and hopes for peace. Thanks for watching. I'm Lindsay Davis. Good night.
Thank you for making World News Tonight with David Moore, America's most watched newscast.
On this Sunday night, Gaza hospital raid. An Israeli raid on the Al-Aqsa hospital claims lives. The frantic scenes as victims are rushed in. Easter at Ottawa's Ukrainian Catholic Church. The calls for extended support for newcomers in Canada as the immigration deadline looms. Celebrating diversity.
I never felt this kind of love for our community.
The Calvary Church blending Easter traditions with trans visibility. And King Charles makes his first major public outing since his cancer diagnosis.
Global National with RNSO. Reporting tonight, Niku Garsha.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. As Easter Sunday celebrations are being marked around the world, King Charles used the occasion to make his first major public appearance since being diagnosed with cancer. The King and Queen Camilla shook hands and chatted with well-wishers after attending a service at Windsor Castle. The 75-year-old monarch's appearance is seen as an effort to reassure the public after he stepped back from public duties in early February. Prince William, Princess Catherine, and their children did not attend the service as Kate undergoes chemotherapy after her own cancer diagnosis. Redmond Shannon reports.
This may be a controlled walkabout inside the walls of Windsor Castle, but it is still an important moment for King Charles. The monarch making his first public appearance since being diagnosed with an unspecified form of cancer earlier this year. His meet and greet featuring some very enthused royal superfans.
Your Majesty, Camilla is 17 now. My King Charles spaniel, she's 17.
Charles' decision to shake hands with well-wishers came after one British newspaper reported he and Queen Camilla were to sit apart from other royals inside the church to protect his health.
Had they been worried about his health and him picking up an infection, they might have insisted he wore some gloves or didn't get too close to members of the public. But the fact that he was happy to shake hands, get quite close to people, that must indicate the doctors have told him that that he's off the sort of danger list, if you like, and they're much more pleased with his progress, and that's a very, very good sign.
The Prince and Princess of Wales normally attend this service, but neither were there this Sunday. Easter had been the approximate return date to public duties for Catherine, but that has since been pushed back indefinitely since she revealed her cancer diagnosis. That in a video statement that ended weeks of online rumours.
At the end of the day, we do have to pinch ourselves and remember that we are talking about human beings. We're talking about a mother with 3 young children. A major concern has been to protect them, as has Prince William's major concern.
The Duchess of York, Sarah Ferguson, was well enough to attend. She was also diagnosed with cancer in January, specifically skin cancer. Sunday is the start of daylight saving time in the UK and is perhaps a metaphorical ray of light in what has been a dark winter for the royals. For now, the King is not scheduled to take part in any public events, but this does raise hopes that he may appear again soon and that he could be well enough to take part in his official birthday celebrations and D-Day commemorations. Both of those events are still 2 months away. Me too.
All right, Redmond Shannon outside Buckingham Palace in London. Thanks, Redmond. Pope Francis, who's dealing with his own health problems, also publicly appeared for Easter Sunday services.
Preghiamo per quanti hanno perso la vita.
The pontiff led about 60,000 people in Mass at St. Peter's Square after presiding over Saturday night's Easter Vigil. The 87-year-old has struggled with respiratory issues in recent months. He's been limiting his public speaking and skipping some events like the Good Friday procession as a health precaution. During today's Easter address, the Pope also called for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and the release of all Hamas-held hostages. The humanitarian crisis in Gaza is worsening with another Israeli strike near a hospital today. Frantic residents using their bare hands to hoist one victim after another from a tent city outside Al-Aqsa Hospital in the center of Gaza. The Israeli military says it was targeting a senior Islamic Jihad militant in the courtyard of the hospital, but Global News cannot independently verify this claim or the video. 2 people were killed, another 15 injured, according to the Associated Press. Under the UN's Geneva Convention, hospitals are supposed to be safe zones at times of war, but that hasn't always been the case in Gaza, which has dozens of hospitals and health centers. Israel, for its part, accuses Hamas of sheltering militants in or near hospitals. There were heated exchanges in Tel Aviv last night, Israeli citizens putting more pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu's government. They say he's an obstacle to finding the remaining hostages in Gaza. More truce negotiations were planned today in neighboring Egypt. In Ukraine, at least 2 people were killed after another round of Russian airstrikes on the country's energy infrastructure. Ukraine's Air Force says 11 drones and 14 cruise missiles were launched overnight. Most were shot down, but damage was still dealt to various energy facilities across the country. This follows more than a week of similar attacks that have cut power to hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians. Ukraine's largest private energy company warns 5 of its 6 plants have been damaged or destroyed, and repairs could take up to 18 months. Since Russia's invasion began 2 years ago, Canada has welcomed nearly 300,000 Ukrainians seeking to escape the conflict on emergency visas. But today was the last day for anyone who was granted those visas to arrive in this country. Now advocacy groups are calling for an expansion to the government's program to help those who want to stay and become permanent residents. Abigail Beeman explains.
An Easter service at this Ukrainian Catholic Church in Ottawa, where there are new faces every week.
There are families that have just arrived a week ago or 2 weeks ago.
Sunday marks the last day for Ukrainians with emergency visas to arrive in Canada.
I think the plan should be extended because unfortunately it's obvious that this war is not going to end soon.
The immigration minister's office says while no extension is currently on the table, they're ready to be flexible and respond to the situation on the ground in Ukraine. Government numbers show nearly 1 million applications were approved under the program, but by the end of February, only about a quarter actually used them.
And we found that quite a few of them are using it as a bit of an insurance policy.
Randall Barron-Sean's Pathfinders for Ukraine nonprofit also found only 7% of those here on an emergency visa have immediate family members in Canada, making them eligible for the government's special pathway to permanent residency.
But we've been heavily lobbying for a streamlined pathway to PR for war-displaced Ukrainians in Canada because many of them are now facing about a year left on their work permit, and there's a big question mark.
My work permit, it's almost a half of the term already gone, and so I have to, think about my future.
Vlada Kushnir is so grateful for how Canada welcomed her and her now 6-year-old son in 2022. She wants to stay and hopes the government will make it easier to get permanent residency for her, but especially, she says, for older Ukrainians who face bigger challenges.
I decided that the ocean is far away from our crazy neighbors, and that's why I decided that my son deserves for a better future, for a safe childhood.
While the Ukrainian community continues to call for more support from Canada on the ground in Ukraine.
Our biggest push is with the federal government in this budget to support Ukraine even more with military assistance.
Canada has committed more than $13 billion in financial, military, and other aid so far. Abigail Beeman, Global News, Ottawa.
The Trudeau government is in the final stages putting together this year's budget. Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland will table it in the House of Commons on April 16th. She's set to consider recommendations from MPs on the House of Commons Finance Committee to do more for seniors struggling to keep up with inflation on fixed incomes. The politicians are calling for richer payouts for existing benefit programs, but they've also endorsed proposals that could make it easier for some seniors to return to the workforce. David Aiken reports.
For these seniors, the weekly trip to the grocery store has turned into a contest pitching rising food prices against their fixed incomes.
It's challenging because you have to find something, hopefully something different every day. And spaghetti is, you don't want to eat that every day. With a fixed income, you really have to budget and budget hard. You're very careful. You have to count your pennies.
Welcome to meeting number 130. A majority of MPs on the House of Commons Finance Committee wants to help even things out with that weekly contest, and they have recommended boosting elderly benefits with an idea to add $50 a month to the guaranteed income supplement and increase old age security by 10% for seniors aged 65 to 74.
No tomatoes, no onions, everything else. You got it.
Meanwhile, business groups would like to help boost seniors' incomes and ease some labor shortage problems by offering seniors a job.
With the baby boomers leaving the job market in large numbers, we've just seen the start of this. We're really worried about where the labor force is going to come from in the future.
Okay, yeah.
The Finance Committee has taken some of their ideas to heart and recommended Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland adjust tax rates to give seniors more of a financial incentive to go back to work.
And that can mean things like deferring CPP, but it could mean other things like withdrawing some of the clawbacks that you might get at fairly modest levels of income.
Now, boosting benefit payments would likely cost the Treasury $8–10 billion a year, and that's money that Minister Freeland just doesn't have if she wants to hit debt and deficit targets that she's already announced. But those ideas about tweaking tax rules for seniors who want to return to work might be the kind of less expensive option for a cash-strapped government looking for a way to help some seniors pay their bills. David Aiken, Global News, Ottawa.
In the U.S., efforts are now underway to clear the wreckage of that bridge in Baltimore days after its dramatic collapse that killed 6 road workers. Engineers are now trying to dismantle thousands of tons of steel in the water. They're cutting up the fallen bridge into smaller segments so they can be lifted out by cranes. The disaster has also affected 15,000 people and their jobs after the incident forced Baltimore's port to close. Officials say the cost of rebuilding the bridge could soar up to $2 billion U.S. Faith meets inclusivity. Coming up, a Calvary church challenging norms, combining Easter service with a drag show. A Calgary church is showing solidarity with its LGBTQ+ community by combining an Easter service with a drag show. This year, Easter Sunday overlaps with International Transgender Day of Visibility. The Calgary Unitarian Church blended both celebrations with its Drag Me to Church event. As Global's Craig Momney reports, organizers say the event is not only a show of support for the trans community, but also a sacred act of protest.
When he was younger, Benjamin Tanner knew he was different. 15 years ago, he found his alternate identity, Jessica Bunny.
It's like a liberation of, the constraints of what everyday life is like, and being able to be a sort of caricature of myself and sort of what gender means to me and femininity.
When he came out, Tanner thought that was the end of his relationship with religion and faith. However, on Sunday, he took Jessica to church.
We thought, what a remarkable opportunity to bring Easter and International Trans Day of Visibility together, telling a different version of the Easter story.
I grew up going to the church, but I never felt this kind of love for our community here. I didn't know I could be who I was when I was growing up. So to see this whole congregation of people gathered and to love and accept people on Trans Day of Visibility is such an incredibly beautiful thing.
When I see the harmful trans laws coming into effect, both in the United States and increasingly harsher ones coming in Canada, I think it's important as people of faith that we stand up and say, no, actually, every human being is sacred.
Trans advocate Victoria Buchholz says she's been seeing a turning point.
It shows that there's a diversity of responses amongst the religious community, just as there are amongst the secular community, that there are absolutely churches, there are synagogues, there are mosques who are stepping up and saying we are queer inclusive, we are embracive of all people in society.
All the money that is collected from Sunday's service will be donated to Skipping Stone, an organization that provides gender-affirming care across Alberta.
And we had a fabulous service.
Craig Momney, Global News.
More than 400 Canadian artists have signed an open letter denouncing what they describe as anti-trans legislation across parts of Canada. Musicians Tegan and Sarah released a letter signed by prominent Canadians. It criticizes Alberta Premier Danielle Smith for targeting transgender youth with proposed bans on hormonal treatment, puberty blockers, and gender confirmation surgery. Similar policies in New Brunswick and Saskatchewan are also noted. The letter warns the anti-trans policies in Canada threaten the mental and physical well-being of trans individuals throughout the country. Ahead, sustainable solution, the innovative use of chewing gum to reduce medical waste. You might not think about it every day, but plastic pollution is one of the biggest challenges facing humanity today. The world produces mountains upon mountains of plastic waste, and Canadians are no exception. We generate about 3 million tons of plastic waste every year, and that's just Canada. And for those who think recycling is the solution, think again. Researchers say only 9% of what's put in blue bins is actually recycled. As Eric Sorensen reports, researchers in Scotland are chewing their way toward a solution to cut down on waste.
During the pandemic, those little plastic cassettes to test for COVID were produced and used by the millions and then tossed out. A byproduct of the world's response to COVID was a mountain of lateral flow tests, LFTs, made of virgin plastics from fossil fuels. But a Scottish researcher is reprocessing some novel ingredients to make a new generation of LFTs.
We've made one in recycled chewing gum.
In case you missed that, she said chewing gum.
Old chewing gum, fridge parts, and limestones.
So chewing gum, mostly scraped off the street, along with discarded parts from refrigerators and other bioproducts that can replace virgin plastics with something less harmful to the environment.
What we're hoping is that through the use of these cassettes, we can ultimately save 30 to 50% of the carbon footprint of the virgin material production.
Really, this is the challenge of modern healthcare.
This professor of anthropology and health says many medical devices are not only produced with fossil fuels, they end up in the oceans and soil.
We are producing huge numbers of single-use plastic devices, but those same devices are also contributing to a growing burden of plastic pollution globally.
Some 2 to 4 billion lateral flow tests are produced globally each year, not just for COVID, but for pregnancy and infectious diseases. The challenge is scaling up these prototypes into an industry of recyclables.
We have the machinery, the skill sets, and all the knowledge that we need to be able to turn this into a mass-produced item, move into a more sustainable option on products like this.
The message to the medical industry: heal thyself.
We need not only healthcare systems that will contribute to growth and to health, we also need healthcare systems that are themselves healthy.
And we may soon have old chewing gum to thank for products that make us healthy while not making the environment unhealthy. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
Next, Confederation Legacy, how the anniversary of Newfoundland and Labrador's controversial incorporation into Canada is being marked. On the 75th anniversary of Newfoundland and Labrador joining Canada, the province celebrates with arts grants and commemorative license plates. Yet the legacy of Confederation still stirs ongoing debate. The province's terms of union fail to address Indigenous rights, leaving many excluded from programs and services. Heidi Petrachik explores other overlooked complexities and how Newfoundlanders perceive the history today.
Representation in Parliament. It's the original terms of union, making the once British Dominion of Newfoundland into Canada's 10th province. We got the Canadian citizenship, and they just gave one big certificate for the entire province.
2 referendums in 1948 had put the Confederation question to a public vote. The outcome of the first so split that a second was done the next month. While the initial vote offered 3 choices, the next only gave Confederation or responsible government, and Confederation squeaked by.
People in the post-war period feared that a return to the uncertainty and the hardship of the Great Depression, and what Canada offered was a kind of economic safety net.
But controversy stuck in songs and on film.
A conspiracy to sell, and I use the word sell advisedly, this country to the Dominion of Canada.
Strange times. And I remember being told by one of my parents that everybody in the graveyard voted to join Canada.
The province's first premier, Joey Smallwood, is often seen as Confederation's main architect. But Greg Malone's book, Don't Tell the Newfoundlanders, reveals a twist, after he says documents in the nation's archives exposed a secret, that Britain was pulling the strings behind the scenes, offering Newfoundland to Canada so its massive war debt would be forgiven.
It was the British who had to make the whole thing appear democratic. So the governor here was sent here to do that deal, to make it happen. And he was the only one who had access to the final vote.
For Malone, the result set the stage for years of tense relations with Ottawa over everything from fisheries to offshore oil. A union that would have been better off, he says, if the island had been able to negotiate the terms of union on its own terms.
It's not the problem that we joined Canada. I think that's fine. It's the way it was done.
On the anniversary of the day the deal became official, debate over what might have been is likely to go on for decades more. Heidi Petrachik, Global News, Halifax.
And that is Global National for this Sunday night. I'm Neetu Garcha. Tonight's Your Canada is Leading Tickles Newfoundland and Labrador. We love seeing your Canada. Please keep emailing your photos to viewers@globalnational.com. Thanks so much for watching. Donna will be back with you tomorrow. Have a great night.
Thank you for watching and privilege of your time. This is Amir Shakil 5858. I am Amir Goodman. Have a good life.